Good morning, everybody. Good morning. What a great crowd this is. Thank you, Adam, and thank you to the staff and board of NACEP for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. I can't tell you what a wonderful feeling I have looking out at all of the crowd in front of me. NACEP is really a pretty wonderful organization and a pretty amazing organization that is growing, that aims to create a real community of work and expertise and information sharing around concurrent enrollment. I'm particularly excited about the quality assurance work that NACEP has been launching over the past several years around recognized standards for programmatic work. This is, in a sense, the essence of what we're all about, to be able to really do the best we can by our students. So what an amazing feeling just to look at all of you who are all so deeply engaged in all of this. My name is Sheri Ranis, and I am a strategy director at Lumina Foundation based out of Indianapolis. We're a national private foundation, and our sole mission is to improve college access and success for our students in the United States. And as Adam mentioned, our work is described by our Goal 2025 we call it, which is a goal to have 60% of all Americans hold quality credentials by 2025. In the past 10, 15 years, we've been stuck at 38 to 40%. And so we have a 20% stretch goal, which in some ways seems a little modest, but in fact is actually not modest at all. We believe it equates to basically 23 million more degrees than what our nation would ordinarily produce in terms of credentials and degrees if we just kept on going. And by the way, when we talk about credentials, we're not talking about BAs. We're talking about sub-baccalaureate credentials and as well as BAs. And in fact, have put a lot of work and emphasis on community colleges over the years. I wanted to talk a little bit, as a foundation person, as a funder, we get to say the obvious, and I got the plum assignment of speaking first, so I get to speak in big generalities and tell you the obvious stuff. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Goal 2025, a little bit about Lumina, and the way we're parsing it this year and the next several years, and then talk a little bit more about, in a sense, celebration of what you all are doing, because it is such an incredibly affirming and important work that you pursue. So Goal 2025, that notion of 60% of Americans holding quality credentials, has provided Lumina with a more disciplined approach to what needs to happen on the ground and in policy circles. And by policy circles, I mean federal level, state level, and local level. That's exciting work. But we've redesigned our strategy to focus in even more on what it really takes to get that goal going. So in February of 2013, we announced a new strategic plan with 8 different foci. And just to give you a few examples of some of those, we have a new focus on what student financial supports for post-secondary education should look like. That's a development and a visioning process that is really terribly needed right now. Our financial aid system, especially at the national level, federal level, hasn't really changed very much in 35 to 40 years. Some fresh thinking really needs to be introduced there. We also want to explore new ways of accounting for learning. So competency-based learning, prior learning assessment for those returning to education, and alternative credentials. And that, of course, is a very big area, but I think in the past year or so, we have a jargon in the policy world in education reform. Competency-based learning has become a byword in both K-12 and the higher ed side. It's time to explore what that really means, and I think Lumina is intent on doing that. We're also engaging with metropolitan regions in a very deep way for the first time. Lumina has usually worked at the state policy level, and sometimes, as I mentioned, in the federal national level. But we really feel there's a huge amount of traction in the metro regions, and our goal is to help smooth and accelerate collaboration among the many different kinds of actors, K-12, higher ed, business, political leaders, philanthropies, and other ground service providers. The number of communities that are willing to try to make that choice and to go in that direction to achieve better educational outcomes for their students is really quite extraordinary. Of course, we first immediately think of Cincinnati and their Strive Cincinnati movement, Louisville's 55,000 degrees. Anyone from Cincinnati or Louisville in the house? No, okay, well, anyway, we're giving them a shout out. But this idea of coming together, sort of setting aside power relationships and influence, but really thinking about outcomes and really thinking about how to best serve students fully is something that we celebrate and are trying to push. The element of the work my team has been asked to try to figure out is what concrete operations and cultural changes need to occur on campuses to improve student degree attainment. And by that we mean students of all ages, especially those who are underserved. Insisting that colleges and universities link K-12 through programs like concurrent enrollment and dual enrollment programs is, from our perspective, a marker of how student-focused a higher education institution intends to be. If an institution is not engaged in thinking about or working with dual enrollment and concurrent enrollment and reaching out to its K-12 partners, they're not doing their job. That's kind of the way we see it. And we want to insist that it become the rule, not the exception, around the country. So again, you all are the vanguards and forerunners and all of that. My own personal work over the years has focused on college readiness. Over the past 13 years, in fact, my dissertation was on transition to college, actually, back in the day. It was one of those things that I feel very, very deeply about, and I understand now, as you do too, that research has conclusively documented that students who receive comprehensive financial, academic, and psychological and social supports can and will succeed in post-secondary education. That early exposure to college and career possibilities, the possibilities and pathways and higher expectations for students' achievement provides a connective tissue and an ice-breaking experience for so many students. Even so, we're presented with numerous challenges, not the least of which is assuring that whatever we do, as teachers or administrators or policy shapers or policy makers, that we focus on student requirements now and 10 and 20 years out from now. We have things to correct, and we have things to reinvent. Concurrent enrollment, though, evokes some of the very best thinking in the past couple of decades around student supports, and it's truly an example of reinvention. After all, it charted first as an opportunity for the gifted and talented back in the 50s, did it not? And only in the past 15 to 20 years or so, formulated an exposure to deeper levels of learning and college-going culture for a much wider group of students, and building in those high expectations for those students. Programs helping hundreds or thousands of students have turned into tens of thousands of students across the country, and that is an incredible achievement. And the variation in the way students are targeted and brought into this system and the modes of delivery to help them learn have been notable as well. However, the challenges facing concurrent enrollment echo challenges faced in many other aspects of college readiness work. How can these opportunities be made available to much larger numbers of students who need them, particularly those students who are traditionally underserved? And how do we pay for those existing programs, much less expand them? That is something that folks right here in Florida are confronting right now. Scale and cost, not our favorite words, but persistent companions as we attempt to optimize this educational strategy for our students that we not only have a great faith in, but know works. We know concurrent enrollment works. So concurrent enrollment, you know, it just is very close to our heart. It evokes some of those very key themes that we at Lumina we think are required for a strong education systems. Emphasis on coherence, alignment, cumulative learning, student success as a core value, striving to make things simpler and more customized for students. We're striving to keep students stable and capable of progressing academically and socially throughout various parts of our educational system. We look for smoother pathways, acceptance of credits, easier transfer of a student from one degree designated site to another, from one academic pursuit to the next. And dual enrollment encourages all of this, so much of what we want a responsible educational system to give our students. So I was asked not only to sort of greet you and sort of set the stage for some very, very witty and very, very, just some of our best minds actually, coming to speak to you next, Dr. Matt Giannici and Steve from Sachs. So I get to reflect just a little bit now and sort of tease on efforts to stabilize students and some of the additional developments in education policy and reform that connect to concurrent enrollment, because it is such a high leverage practice. So the question is, like, what can connect and reinforce this particular aspect of education in our system? There's an interplay between what you all are focused on and in many, many other areas. I'm going to focus only briefly on two: the adoption of Common Core state standards and new ways to bring financial stability to students, particularly low-income students. First, on Common Core state standards, how many of you are in states that you feel are actively implementing the standards at this point? I'm going to raise hands. About half of you, okay. This one's a tough one, right? Is everybody familiar with Common Core state standards? Is there anyone here who feels like that's something they would need to have explained to them at this stage? No, I didn't think so. So this is the thing. Common Core state standards and the assessment system that will have to go along with it are both a challenge and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in some ways, I feel, for us as a country. It is in a sense, a documentation of common sense, because it is a documentation of what we view an educated person at age 18, or at the end of the equivalent of 12th grade, in our case, right, looks like. What knowledge and skills that person holds. It's a key acknowledgement of the accumulation of learning. It represents a higher floor for what an educated person is, that is, at the base, what a student must know. And it's a big change in states that don't have high floors for what an educated person is. But in programs like dual enrollment and concurrent enrollment programs that already incorporate academic rigor and college readiness, it's not really a lift, it's really just a realignment or reframing. After all, you live and die by what college readiness means in your programs. And the problem of defining college readiness has been a very difficult one for our country and for every state, much less nationally. So filtering it through a system of what is, in a sense, the backbone of learning, skills and knowledge, makes a lot of sense to us. It's, in a sense, a focus on curricular and instructional upgrades without dictating too much detail about what that means, so that there is state and local control of it. So concurrent enrollment, much like developmental education, general education in the post-secondary side, feels the impact of Common Core state standards adoption in a kind of reverb way, right? It reverberates to you, it makes you, and has required you to reframe, or will require you to reframe and check your content. But that is very much in the spirit of what you all do anyway, because you are constantly bridging between K-12 and higher education. So in a sense, I'm thinking that Common Core state standards work, whatever the politics of it, which we'll talk about in a minute, really is just more of the same for you. It's more of what you do. It's making sure that students who are traversing through concurrent enrollment systems and programs are meeting the standards on both sides of the transom. But there are some challenges and some threats associated with this, and most of them are rhetorical and very unfortunate, I think. Claiming Common Core is a new set of national standards, that the Department of Ed is taking over our country, that vendors are claiming way too fast that their materials are aligned with Common Core. We have a lot of sort of issues as the country adjusts to this reality. But there are new consumer guidelines that are being produced about what curriculum and textbooks, equivalent of textbooks, should look like. And so I would urge all of you to be, if you can, check somewhat regularly with the CCSSO website on Common Core state standards to look at these consumer guidelines that help you think through what materials and instruction really look like, to see if we can keep, in a sense, through our demand for high-quality materials that are truly aligned to Common Core, that we can keep publishers and the test providers in check and really make them validate their claims about alignment. It's a really important piece of this. Moving along to the question about student stabilization, and how to comprehensively support students. This is so interesting. There is a irrefutable need in our communities for, as I was mentioning before, really creative, integrated thinking about what students need. And I was so pleased to see that psychosocial supports are actually a part of your program this year. It's not a negligible part of it. I'm going to talk about something that's a little bit less about psychosocial support and more comprehensive. So if you imagine, and don't imagine, we know that 80% of all community college students have unmet needs even after they've received financial aid, leaving most of them to figure out on their own how to provide for themselves and their families while they're in school. And if you estimate that there's something as many as 1.6 million students who receive maximum federal Pell Grants, but are likely not receiving any other public resources like healthcare insurance, assistance for cash or food, transportation, housing, or home or energy costs for which they're eligible. You're not surprised to see that the #1 reported reason for students who leave college is the pressure of combining work and school and these kinds of financial situations. Over 70% of community college students who leave say it's because they need to support themselves and their family, according to a recent Public Agenda poll. And, that's not a surprise. So the response, and a response that we're very excited about, has no particular name. Hey, how's that for a segue? Sometimes there are a bunch of folks who call it Integrated Service Delivery, or ISD. Has anyone heard of that term? That's a pretty bureaucratic term. I don't like it very much. We've been taking to call this kind of thinking comprehensive benefits access for students. Still, it just says benefits, so it sounds a little bit, I don't know, very particular, a little technocratic too. Student stabilizers, well, that's kind of too general. One-stop shop. Does anybody feel they have familiar with one-stop shop? Can I see a show of hands? Does anyone have one-stop shop on their campuses? Oh, maybe about 20% of you, 10% of you just raised your hands. Anyway, the idea is to provide to organize your campus so that it's not a building or a desk or assigned one person, but rather a campus that's organized, truly organized to serve students and provide the right kind of financial advice and support, access to those public benefits that a very low-income student might be able to access, financial literacy, academic counseling, and if needed, social and psychosocial support, as well as child care and family care advice. This idea is very, very powerful. Tremendously sad that it doesn't have a good name yet. Let's call it Comprehensive Benefits Access or Student Stabilizers for now. But if you integrate student support hubs within your campus and you bring together that financial coaching, the student mentoring, the access to those public and private financial resources and other academic and non-academic supports, students stay in school. That's just the bottom line. So this has been piloted in a number of community colleges around the country, but it's only perhaps several dozen at most that have tried to build this real strong capacity and transformed the way they behave and the way they integrate and interact with students. There has been some really good research on Kingsborough Community College that did just this, and the two exemplars that I like to call out are the College of New Mexico and Des Moines Community College. Anyone from New Mexico or Iowa in the hall? Yeah, okay. So these places are truly vanguard in the way they're thinking about student supports and student stabilization. So it has inspired the funding community to go in and to try to grow this phenomenon and make more people aware of truly student-centered activity in this way, well beyond, as I said, that one-stop mentality. We have something called the Working Family Success Network. It's a brand new network that's going to be announced next month, which is going to include 16 community colleges and a pool of funders from the Ford Foundation, Carnegie Corporation, NE Casey Foundation, and we at Lumina are supporting it. We're hoping to reach 50,000 students over the next 4 years through those 16 or 17 campuses. Currently, we've got 20 to 30,000 students covered through a project we call the Benefits Access Community College Project. That's only on 7 community college campuses. But the idea is that building this capacity is not all that easy. It really requires a lot of good thought, hard thought, and invention, and a lot of commitment by a lot of different people on campus who don't necessarily work together ordinarily. And so we have been supporting this Benefits Access Community College group and studying the heck out of them for the past 2 years to try to see how we can actually create a model and a method of transformation at the institutional level that really makes sense. So on the benefits access stabilization side, after talking a little bit about what's going on now, I'd love it if you walked away considering how you might link your students to your local campuses in this way, and consider examining that model if your campus has not yet moved in this direction. It is a very promising and a very, in a sense, essential way to think about helping our students. Okay, so with that, I'm going to close and say thanks once again to NACEP and to all of you for what you do. I will walk away from this room deeply inspired by the kind of commitment you show and the kind of care you give and every day to your students. What an amazing inspiration. Thank you so very much.